So hello everybody, and welcome back for the 5th day of the Americas Spectrum Management Conference. So apologies for the slightly delayed start. We've actually had a few little technical issues with Richard Marsden, who is supposed to be moderating the sessions. We've actually very grateful to Amit Nagpal from Ether, who's actually stepped in to moderate today's session. So I'm going to introduce Amit and your speakers very shortly. So yeah, as I said, apologies for the very slight delay in getting started this morning. So yesterday, the discussions at the conference focused on the key mid-band frequencies. So we had a look at, first of all, the 6 gigahertz band, and then we had a look at the CBRS band. So we had two really interesting discussions focusing on that. Now today we're going to continue the discussion to look at the key mid-band frequencies, and we're going to be looking at the C-band, and then we're going to be looking more broadly at what the other options are for finding spectrum for 5G within the mid-band frequencies. I'm going to come to that in just a second, and I'll run through in a little bit more detail the schedule for today. But just before we did get started, there were a couple of things that I wanted to mention. So first of all, I wanted to say a very big thank you to all of our sponsor organizations once again. So you can see all the organizations that have supported the event on the screen beside me here. We really do appreciate the support of each and every one of them. So without them, the event wouldn't be possible. So thank you very much to all of you. As I said, the schedule for today, we have 2 plenary sessions running. I mentioned that we're going to be starting very shortly looking at the C-band and looking at timelines and future plans across the region for the C-band or the use of the band. We're then going to be having our showcase sessions for the day. So we have 2 showcase sessions running today. Showcase session 1 is going to be looking at an introduction to bidding in an FCC-style clock auction hosted by Economists Incorporated. And showcase session 2 is going to be hosted by SIA and is going to be looking at comms on the last frontier, so providing Arctic satellite service, which sounds fascinating. So those 2 showcases will be running immediately following the conclusion of today's first session. We then have a short break before we come back to look, as I said, at the mid-band more broadly. So we've had sessions looking at CBRS, 6 gig, and C-band today, but looking maybe at what other options exist to provide the required additional mid-band spectrum for 5G. Before we finish off by passing over to all of you guys out there and giving you the opportunity to once again get involved in the discussion with our Have Your Say session, where you'll be able to bring your audio and video feed live and give your thoughts on the discussions that have been taking place. So without further ado, we'd better get going. So I would like to introduce to the stage now our moderator, our substitute moderator, I should say, Amit Nagpal. So Amit, thank you so much for stepping in. Really do appreciate it. And I know you're going to be busy today now because you're moderating the second session later on as well. But thank you. Do appreciate you stepping in. And yeah, without further ado, over to you.
No problem at all. Okay, Dan, thank you very much. Yes, so it's going to be, as Dan says, a very busy morning for you in the US and afternoon for us over in Europe. Just talking through some of the other mid-band spectrum bands. So as Dan mentioned, we're starting with C-band today, and then moving on to, I'll be doing a second session talking more widely about other mid-band spectrum bands that are available. So maybe one poll we should do actually is, do I do a better job moderating a session which I've had 2 minutes notice for, which is the first one, or which I've had 6 weeks notice for and perhaps overthought, which is the second one this afternoon. So we'll see at the end how they both go. Anyway, I'm actually quite delighted to be doing the C-band session. Sorry that Richard can't make it, but it's a good opportunity for me in that sense. In that it's obviously a very key band. You know, it's obviously absolutely vital in the USA. We've got the auctions coming up starting later this year, which are going to release 280 megahertz of key spectrum for 5G. And you know, I noticed that all the operators, particularly since the iPhone launch, are plugging their nationwide 5G coverage. But I think adding this spectrum to the mix is going to be very important for several of the operators and having what you might call a real 5G service offering. So very interesting, a very interesting and important auction coming up. And then more internationally, I mean, the 3.5 gigahertz band is very much a key 5G spectrum band. So it will be great to hear what other plans are being made internationally. And as you'll have seen from the agenda, we have speakers from 3 regulators, the FCC, ISED in Canada, and the IFT in Mexico, speaking first of all. And then we'll be followed up by a speaker from Ericsson, and finally a speaker from Intelsat. So it's a similar format to the other sessions in that we invite each of the speakers to give introductory remarks for the first few minutes. So we're giving them about 5 to 7 minutes each. And then we'll have a discussion session. So if you can, please use the chat function on the session if you have any questions to feed them through. And I believe Dan and the team pick them out and bring them up on our screen for us to raise during the discussion session. And one final mention, there are a couple of polls for the poll questions for this session, as usual. So please do vote for these as we go through this, the session. The 2 topics are, first of all, what would be the best assignment approach for any spectrum that can be freed in the US in the 3.4 to 3.55 gigahertz band. I'm actually thinking this should actually be my session, this poll, but never mind. But we'll cover it anyway in this session. My session later today, I mean. And then secondly, the second question is, what approach should Canada take to awarding the C-band spectrum? So please do vote on those, and we'll look at the results of those and bring them into the discussion later. So over to our speakers. I'd say please, each of you, please try and stick to the 7 minutes maximum if you can. I'll be quite strict with timing, especially as we've started a few minutes late. So first of all, can I introduce Julia McHenry, who is the Chief of Economics and Analytics at the FCC, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Amit, and thank you, Jordan, and congratulations on making it to the final day of this great conference. So I just wanted to take a moment to run through the Commission's latest efforts on making mid-band spectrum available for 5G, particularly in this 3 gigahertz range. As many of you know, the Commission has pursued an aggressive strategy of making low, mid, and high band spectrum available for advanced wireless services, including 5G, which we expect to have enormous benefits for the American consumers and to help close the digital divide. And by now, I do not have to tell any of you on why mid-band spectrum is essential for 5G build-out. In particular, the spectrum in this 3 gigahertz range is critical because it is globally harmonized, enabling important economies of scale across the Americas and globally. So just starting in order of what we've been auctioning at the FCC and keeping us busy, Auction 105, which auctioned the 3.5 gigahertz CBRS spectrum, was our first mid-band 5G auction and our first auction during the pandemic. It was also unique in the volume of licenses, with over 20,000 licenses offered, which was really the most ever. And the auction enticed, in fact, 271 qualified bidders, far exceeding our expectations. So in the end, we sold, we had 20,625 licenses, had winning bidders, 228 winning bidders in total, and they raised over, $4.5 billion in gross proceeds. So we think this remarkable interest is really likely due to a combination of factors. The county-sized licenses really appealed to more of the smaller potential bidders. This was the Commission's first auction of flexible use licenses in the mid-band spectrum, and with its unique balance of coverage and capacity, so it had great demand in that respect. And we think there are unique opportunities here with the opportunistic use of GAA spectrum next to it. So this all points to the promise of CBRS. But before we move on to C-band and 345, I just want to give a little bit of a shout out to the auctions team. It's, the logistics of running the Auction 105, when it was our first auction during a pandemic, was really quite impressive. An auction, which you'll find out actually in the next session, is like a musical or a play. And so what the bidders see or the audience sees is a seamless bidding interface, the flow of information from the Commission. Meanwhile, behind the scenes, the crew is constantly moving, working to ensure that everything goes off without a hitch, that the bidding system is working, answering applicant and bidder questions, and in this case, also ensuring that the entire staff was socially distanced and safe. And for this team, it's a close-knit team that usually works in the same room together. So this was really a huge challenge, and we were thrilled that we were able to pull it off while keeping everybody safe behind the scenes. So turning to what's next, 3.7 to 3.98 gigahertz, or the C-band, will make nearly 300 megahertz of spectrum available. So in March 2020, the Commission approved the C-band report and order to make 280 megahertz of spectrum available in mid-band, no later than December 5th, 2025. This will be auction 107. And our goal was really to make a significant amount of spectrum available quickly by adopting a robust transition schedule and holding a public auction to ensure that the spectrum gets put to its highest and best use as quickly as possible. So I'm delighted to say that auction 107 is on track to start on December 8th. The short-form filing window closed on September 22nd, and right now the staff is working hard to review those applications to get the bidding started for 5,684 licenses at the beginning of December. But as you all know, that the auction is really only one side of this coin. The staff across the Commission have continued to work tirelessly since the order was adopted to ensure a smooth transition of the existing services out of the lower portion of the band and into the upper 200 megahertz. All 5 space station operators have elected to take part in the innovative 2-phased accelerated clearing program, in which 120 megahertz will be cleared in 46 PEAs in phase 1, with the deadline of December 5th, 2021 for clearing. And then the remaining 300 megahertz will be cleared by December 5th, 2023 in phase 2. So finally, moving on to what's next. The Commission has proposed to make available the 3.45 to 3.55 gigahertz band. We are really excited about this. This is relatively new. So just last month, we proposed to make 100 megahertz of spectrum between 3.45 and 3.55 available for flexible use wireless services throughout the contiguous United States. We sought comment on a number of things: adding a co-primary non-federal fixed and mobile allocation to the band, establishing unpaired 20 megahertz blocks for this band, which would align with 3.7 gigahertz, the C-band, license areas at the partial economic area on a basis, which again will be similar to C-band. And in addition, the item proposes service, technical, and competitive bidding rules for flexible use licenses in the band, which largely align, again, with the 3.7 gigahertz band rules. Coordination requirements, of course, we are still working through and have proposed coordination requirements with our federal incumbents to allow adoption of a limited cooperative planning and periodic use areas. So in tandem with the work by DoD and other federal partners, we are on course for the spectrum auction in the coming year. While we continue to work with the Commission, with our partners at NTIA, the ball is in the stakeholders' court to give us feedback on our proposals. All in all, when combined with our other efforts regarding 3 gigahertz spectrum, the result of these 3 auctions will bring 530 megahertz of contiguous mid-band spectrum available for 5G and other next generation services. So thank you, Amit, and I look forward to the rest of the panel and questions.
Great, thank you very much. So there was a great perspective on developments in the US, and let's move on just across the border. And can I introduce Chantal Davis, who is Director with the Spectrum Regulatory Best Practices Unit in ICED in Canada. So I guess you'll be talking about the plans for the award of the 3.5 spectrum in Canada. Over to you.
Thanks. Good morning, everyone, and thank you to the organizers for introducing me to this this panel. So yeah, I'm going to talk about C-band in Canada. So if you can move to the next slide, please. So this gives an overview of our current state of the C-band for Canada. So as mentioned earlier on in the conference, we are auctioning the 3500. So for that's our 3.45 to 3.65 gigahertz spectrum in June 2021. That we've been working on for several years, and I think I talked the conference last year about what our auction will look like. We had quite a different scenario than the US. In Canada for that band, we had auctioned it for fixed wireless access. So we decided that we would go ahead and do an auction for that spectrum rather than to look at the CBRS option that the US did, given that we had a different incumbent situation. So now we're going into our next phase, which we just put out our consultation on August 27th for the next portion of the band. So from 3650 to 4200 megahertz, we were looking at what we could do next. We are getting close to our closing date on the comment period there. So I'm very much looking forward to hearing what the poll says about what we should do. Next slide, please. So just to give a bit of an overview of what we had and where we're going with this band. So currently, the first 50 megahertz of that band is wireless broadband service, very similar to what was available in the US as well. We had made it available as an all-com, all-serve band. So basically, that means that the licensees have they have the full block of spectrum, so the 50 megahertz licenses for a large area, which would be our tier 4 areas, and there's 172 of those across the country. So we do have 320 plus licensees in that band, and they're primarily using it for it's a bit of a mix. There's some rural WISPs that are using it. Local municipalities are using it for things like water, for SCADA for water systems, as well as things like closed circuit cameras and those kinds of things. So it is a significant change in going into this band. And our goal overall was not to touch this band until we had an opportunity to provide them a home in the future. And so that's why we didn't address it when we did the 3500. Next slide, please. So we also, similar to pretty much everybody in the world, have fixed satellite service in 3700 to 4200. So we've got over 500 licensed stations. Those are the ones in blue. Most of those are using it for data applications. A lot of it's used for backhaul for rural and remote areas, as well as for government systems and redundancy. And then in pink there, that we have the 2500 license exempt systems. So these are receive only. Most of those are for broadcast, for content for both FM radio stations and TV. So similar to the US, we had to try and find out where all these were. It wasn't something that we were tracking. So we did do a call out for requests for information, and we continue to have that open as we're not sure that we've captured everybody, and we want to make sure that we do. So next slide, please. So moving into the paper is structured that we have two sets of proposals. So the first set of proposals largely aligns with what the US is doing as well. So we'll be repurposing the 330 megahertz for flexible use with a 20 megahertz guard band to protect the FSS. We discussed in the paper as well some proposed transition timing. So to move the FSS to the upper 200 megahertz by December 2023. But we also are looking at, given that we are using a significant amount of it for serving rural and remote areas, that we would look at no transition for satellite dependent areas. And that still needs to be determined what those satellite dependent areas are. But, to continue to operate in the full 500 megahertz going forward, and no transition for them. And then we're looking at displacing the existing WBS licensees with two time frames that we've proposed. So 2023 for urban areas, and then 2025 for all other areas. But we also would like to, or propose to designate 80 megahertz that would be available for shared use. So we are doing some initial consultation on what that would be, but that would require another another process to set all the rules with respect to what that would be. However, the idea is that WBS could then eventually move to that portion of the band. And so you'll note that I didn't mention anything about compensation. This is not something that traditionally Canada has done. We've generally allowed our operators to move forward and give them time to adjust and also trying to give them spectrum in order to continue services. So that leads us into a secondary proposal that we had on the table, which is the next slide, please. So we also had Telesat come in and talk to us about a proposal that they put forward. So Telesat proposed that they would clear the spectrum for us and clear 400 megahertz, that they would keep the first 200 megahertz and receive a flexible use license, that they could then make an offer on the secondary market, and they would clear the other 200 megahertz so that we could offer 180 for auction. And finally, my last slide. So we also just put out a request for information to make sure that we had all the data. The consultation is very dense when it comes to technical issues because there's a lot of sharing and issues with making sure that our existing users are protected for the time being. So we also are asking to make sure that we have a very clear information for everyone. So thank you, and look forward to the rest of the session. Thanks.
Great, thank you very much, Chantal. Perfect. Okay, going in another direction geographically. Let's head over to find out what's going on in Mexico. Can I introduce Ramiro Camacho, who is commissioner with the regulator there, the IFT. And Ramiro, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. So thank you. I'm going to start with my slides. So next slide, please. Yeah, this is the frequency allocation currently for the band 3.3 to 4.2 gigahertz. So I think there is nothing strange here, I guess. So let's go to the next slide. See, this is the slide I'm going to be focusing on about the current assignment of the 3.3, 3.6 gigahertz band. So currently there is in the 3.4, 3.6, there is some fixed satellite services. These services are used by the federal government. Are used for national security and for rural internet purposes. I mean, this has been used for many years in that. So, but we have shared use of that spectrum for terrestrial operators, Telcel and AT&T. They have these bands for fixed wireless service, and we have only this in the 3.4, 3.450. We have a space that we are going to be auctioning off, most likely in 2000, at the beginning of 2022. I mean, this is going to be fixed wireless. The AT&T and Telcel, they have their licenses recently renewed for 20 years, so they are going to stay there. But we have 50 megahertz here that we are going to auction. And in the band, the 3.3 to 3.4 band, we have some we have 50 megahertz that are currently used by public operators. Actually, they are the state governments that have this spectrum, but they have been using it was given to them for WiMAX and other services that they could provide to rural areas. But the use of this spectrum has been very inefficient. So some states are using it and some states are not using it at all. So we are moving them to other bands. I'm talking about the 3 point, let me see, the 3.3 to 3.3, the 3.3 to 3.335. Yeah, this is the 50 megahertz are here, the SCT, the government, the Ministry of Communications. So, and then we have the federal government. It has this telecom company that offers rural internet access, and they use the 3.4 to 3.7 for air to space to earth transmissions. And then in that segment there are some satellite landing rights by foreign satellites, Inmarsat and Passat. So we have plans for auctioning off the 3.3 to 3.4 by 2022. This is going to be for wireless access, mobile or fixed wireless access. And we are going to keep the 3.4 to 3.45 for fixed wireless access. These two segments. One, one is going to stay fixed wireless, and the other is going to be mobile, fixed or mobile access. So next slide, please. So this is a little repetitive, but this basically I'm showing here the bands that currently are used by the government, the 3.4 to 3.7 gigahertz space to earth, and the air to space is in the 6 gigahertz band. It's typical of this kind of use. The satellites mexicanos, they are really Eutelsat, so they are using 3.7 to 4.2 gigahertz space to earth, and we have satellite landing rights in these bands also, the 3.7 to 4.2 gigahertz and the upper bands. Next slide, please. So we have this PABF, which is the name of the plans. We have the plan for 2020 and the plan for 2021. So we are expecting to make 100 megahertz in the 3.3, 3.4, and 50 megahertz in the 3.4, 3.445. So with this, we are going to have 300 megahertz for broadband services, plus 91 megahertz in the 1.427, 1.518 megahertz band, and 140 megahertz in the 2.5 gigahertz band. This is a spectrum for 5G in the middle bands. Currently the 3.3, 3.4 gigahertz frequency band has been identified as IMT by many countries, including Mexico. And the 3.6 and 3.7 has been identified as IMT by Canada, Colombia, Costa Rica, and the US. In the CMR 23, the identification of 3.3, 3.4 gigahertz and 3.6, 3.8 gigahertz will be evaluated by use for satellite mobile services. So and guaranteeing protection to current primary service. I have to add only that the 3.4 and 3.6 is in Mexico is shared by the satellites and the fixed wireless service, but the satellite service are protected from interference from the fixed wireless service. So thank you very much. I look forward to the question part of this session.
Great, thank you very much, Ramiro. Okay, we're now going to get some industry perspective. And so can I introduce our next speaker? It's Jared Carlson, who is Vice President of Government Affairs and Public Policy with Ericsson North America. So over to you, Jared.
Thanks, Amit. I appreciate it. And really kudos to the organizers of this conference. I think you've done an amazing job going online. If we can go to the first slide and start talking about this. And I wanted to try, oh, well, the other first slide, but this is fine. I want to try to set the stage a little bit and describe really why the C-band is so key for Ericsson, we think for the world, frankly. Next slide. So if you take us a little step back and look at the 4G platform and how it really led to the development of the app economy and the incredible growth that was created, you know, Apple was the first $2 trillion company in the world. And the huge numbers in terms of jobs supported by 4G, you know, 20 million jobs, 10% of the increase in GDP in the US from 2011 to 2018 can be attributed to 4G. And it was largely about consumers. And so when we see 5G coming on, Ericsson sees it very much about digitizing enterprise and the public sector. So can we go to the next slide? 5G is going to be a lot about cost optimizations for advancing operations, and there's huge expectations for improving efficiencies in enterprise by unlocking intelligence and making industries more agile so that they can better serve their customers. And how does 5G do that? And I promise this is going to get to why C-band is so important. It does it because it pushes cloud and computing power closer to where it's needed. So it was a real aha moment for me a couple of years ago when I finally understood that it's really about extending computing power from the device itself, from this thing, and into the cloud. So now you don't necessarily need all of this computing power in a device. The network itself can become a real-time extension of compute power. And the way it can do this is responsiveness or latency. You know, the 5G network is improved in an order of magnitude over 4G. Download speeds improved by 10 to 100 times. And it's also possible to serve 10 to 100 times more devices by the same infrastructure. And so the potential for all this is truly staggering. You know, $275 planned US investment in the US building out networks, $500 billion in expected GDP growth from 5G, 3 million jobs added, and this is a global number, but 13.2 trillion in projected global economic impact over the next 15 years. So can we go to the next slide, please? So we want to speed up things in the US and build out the platform faster. And the way Ericsson sees it, US leadership really depends on two things. One is building out the 5G platform, so those first three blurbs up there. And two, by activating the developer ecosystem through collaboration between the network and what it can enable with real-time compute power. So a little bit of background. The US was the first to launch 5G in 2018 and also the first to launch it in low, mid, and high bands. Many firsts took place in the US, but I hate to say it, but we actually have fallen behind in 5G, even though we had this great 4G leadership position. The number one job is access for more mid-band spectrum and fast. That's the quickest path to both coverage and capacity. Zoning and permitting in the US are about 45,000 jurisdictions that can have a say over the permitting process. And then workforce becomes the next bottleneck if you've got the spectrum and a sped up permitting process. But let me go back to spectrum, since that's why we're here today. In the US, we've seen, in terms of mid-band, we've seen CBRS spectrum come online. Thanks for the update, Julia, on all of the efforts from the FCC. And then what we're talking about today, the C-band. And it really is our #1 priority at Ericsson in terms of spectrum in the US and globally. It's a spectrum that will drive the economy that I just spoke about, combining aspects of coverage that we see in the lower bands with the incredible speeds that you see in the millimeter wave spectrum. And really unlocking ways to not just serve urban areas, but also rural and underserved areas with this spectrum that's so crucial. So if we could go to the next slide, please. And why is it such a big piece, and where does the U.S. stack up? Well, here you have it. The midband that we're looking at, that we're going to need, here's the U.S. down here at the bottom. It's going to come from CBRS, which we've already had this auction. There'll be some 2.5 spectrum in the BRS auction next year. And our main hope in the short term is 280 megahertz of C-band spectrum that gets released between now and 2023. Look at South Korea, China, Japan. They've all surpassed the US in terms of pace of build out and population covered and the consumer experience. And that's because they've had plenty of mid-band spectrum available, about 5 times what any of Ericsson's US customers have had. And when you build on mid-band, you can use your existing grid of towers, and the build out is that much faster. The propagation characteristics of mid-band 5G are not all that different from 4G coverage. In fact, one city, I'll give an example, one city in China has about 46,000 sites using 5G in mid-band. That's more than the entire US, and it's completely built out in South Korea, for example. They already covered 90% of their population and have 30,000 smart factories in 10 enterprise zones. So if we can go to the next slide, the way we see it, it'll be about 2023 where we get close to closing the gap. And part of that, of course, is the second tranche of the C-band spectrum, which will be made available to operators in 2023. So the US will definitely be in the hunt, which is great news. And if we can go to my last slide here. The other thing that is so exciting about C-band is just the global scale. When we look around the world today at where operators are deploying 5G, this is what we see. 70% are leveraging band N77, the real sweet spot for 5G. And we see a lot of further further investment in the band. And it's great from the point of view of economies of scale, 1, and roaming, 2. It means that fewer radios are necessary and all those sensors that are going to be used in smart agriculture and in factories and autonomous vehicles. And what's also really exciting is it really makes for a global roaming band for 5G. This means that 5G can work in devices around the globe, driving those staggering numbers that I mentioned a little bit earlier. So in the US, North America, and around the world, we couldn't be more focused than anything other than the C-band. Thanks. I want to end it here, and I look forward to your questions.
Great. Thank you very much, Jared. Okay, we'll now go over to our final speaker for this panel session. This is Hasan Mawakit, who is Vice President of Spectrum Staff Strategy with Intelsat, who, as we all know, is Intelsat are one of the key incumbent users of this spectrum in North America. So over to you.
All right. Good morning, everybody. Thank you, Amit, and thank you for great presentations. I would like to wrap up here by giving the perspective of the satellite industry and this whole process. And as you know, in the US, we did play a significant role in making this spectrum available by taking unprecedented initiative to collaborate and work with industry. So if we can go on to the next slide, please. All right. So to give you a perspective, like was mentioned by Jared, C-band is really important. And around the world for 5G, it is really in the sweet spot in terms of coverage and capacity. So looking specifically at Region 2, you see the difference in allocation. And right now here in Region 2, there's two countries that have open C-band proceedings. Canada, obviously, like we heard from Chantal, and there's also Brazil that is also looking at C-band. So with the U.S., just to give some context, some history. So the process started in earnest really in 2017. So it took about 2.5 years of deliberations with the industry stakeholders, and it was a very constructive and spirited discussion that culminated with an FCC order that came out early this year, where the satellite industry would clear 300 megahertz in 2 tranches by December 2023. And what's really unique about this order is how the FCC created this framework that incentivized everybody to collaborate and achieve the objective of making spectrum available. So if we can just go on to the next slide, please. So what made it happen? I mean, how did we get there? Because as you know, the C-band spectrum has been contentious since really 2007, even before, because that was the first time it was put in the WRC agenda item. We are now in 2020, and I think there are 3 key drivers here why we are here, what made it happen finally. So first, on the technology side, the mobile technology has evolved and developed to a point where it is mature to fully take advantage of C-band. That's on the mobile side. On the satellite side, video compression technology and OTT and some of the changes in the habits of how people view TV, and less dependence on linear TV and more on OTT. That was a key driver. I mean, it finally reached a point technology-wise that the industry was ready. The second really important point is the regulatory framework. The recognition that the incumbents are providing critical service, that was really key, because the MO before, or the mode of operation for the mobile side, it was to try to downplay the value that the satellite industry plays here in this band. So the recognition that the satellite industry is providing critical service was important, and then that led to establishing a framework that incentivizes everybody to collaborate and move forward, and that was really key. So I commend the FCC for taking this decision. And the third point is industry collaboration. I think the regulators need to look at the industry. We are, on both sides. The industry is mature enough. They can contribute to the process, and both sides during the U.S. process here, during the C-band proceeding, there was immense collaboration from both sides. I mean, I participated personally with a lot of with the mobile industry. We collaborated with the media companies, with the content providers, to find a solution that works for everybody. So I think these are the 3 key drivers of why it happened and why we finally got here where we are. We can go on to the next slide, please. So the job of clearing 300 megahertz is by no means easy. It is an immense job, and it's to be able to do so by December 2023 takes a lot of work. I mean, for us at Intelsat alone, that meant that we are now contracting 7 new satellites to be launched to ensure that our customers continue to have the same service. I mean, that was one of the imperatives that the FCC mandated, was that incumbents or the service that's being provided should continue at equal or better levels. So to us, that meant launching 7 satellites that all have to be in orbit by December 23. It meant a lot of traffic groomings, moving customers around to make things happen. It meant investing in video compression equipment, to upgrade and to put higher efficiency video compression. It meant Earth stations, having to either deploy new Earth stations to seed new satellites for better penetration, or to upgrade them with filters. So it is a massive job that we are undertaking, and this is not only us, by the way. Our colleagues at SES are doing the same thing. So it's a major commitment, and I think it goes back to the FCC, who created that regulatory framework that incentivized everybody to collaborate. So we can go on to the next slide. So what did we learn from this process? One key thing that we learned is that while the U.S. process is great, and there's a lot to learn from the U.S. C-band proceeding, we can't just do a cut and paste of this proceeding to other regions. There's elements that can be absorbed and can be ingested and implemented, but every region is different. I mean, for like I was saying in my first slide, you have Canada and you have ISED in one side, and then you have Brazil on the other side with Anatel. So the nature of usage between the two countries in C-band is immensely different. Where in Canada, there's a B2B prevalence. In Brazil, you have a large B2C, probably in the order of millions of satellite dishes that are currently receiving free TV. So it's a very difficult situation over there in terms of trying to clear C-band. So that is why one size doesn't really fit all on both sides. The second point is the regulations. The regulator has a role to play to incentivize, to get people to move. Essentially, repurposing spectrum by edict does not work. There has to be an environment of collaboration. The third point is that the satellite industry is really in the best position to manage the clearing of spectrum. We know that we have the know-how, we understand the services, we have the technical know-how, and we have the motivation to get it done. And the fourth point is that, which is sort of led to by the previous point, is that industry collaboration is key. When all sides get together, collaborate, and have a candid and open discussion, we can achieve a lot more than both sides sort of talking over each other and arguing. I think we achieved a lot more in the U.S. C-band proceeding by collaborating than by challenging each other. Obviously, it was a spirited discussion, but at the end, I think we got where we wanted to be. And thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Hassan. Okay, so some great opening presentations there. We'll move to a discussion now, and maybe I can kickstart that discussion by first asking a question in relation to the US and the upcoming C-band auction in the US and the upcoming 3.5 gigahertz auction in Canada. And one thing I'm aware of in the auction in Canada is that the ISED has made a conscious decision to set aside some of the spectrum available in each area for some of the smaller operators, I guess, to give them more of a chance to compete against sort of the big three, who obviously have a lot of financial firepower. And maybe, Chantal, if you could say a little bit more about that, but also if I could address the question to the FCC in the sense that obviously we've seen the T-Mobile and Sprint merger in the US, and you've now got sort of three big, sort of fairly equally sized operators, I would say. And I know that obviously when that whole decision of whether to approve that merger was looked at, part of this was to also sort of have Dish coming in, so to keep that sort of challenger fourth operator. And I wondered, did the FCC think about setting aside spectrum at all for smaller operators or smaller organizations just to sort of help the competitive environment? So maybe Julie, if I start with, Chantal, if I start with you and tell us a little bit more about Canada, and then over to Julia for the FCC, the US perspective.
Sure. So in our upcoming auction, we have set aside, in wherever we could, 50 megahertz of spectrum to be available for smaller or more regional operators. This is to continue something that we've been working on for quite some time to support our policy objective to ensure that there's competition in the market. We had a set aside as well in the 600, and we've had set asides in and we've had caps and other things in order to make sure that there was opportunities for smaller players to go forward and get spectrum. We recognize that the smaller operators also need to have a chance at 5G, and they actually have lesser spectrum than the other operators to adjust, and so we put forward set aside for that spectrum.
Thank you. Julia, do you want to say something about the US?
Sure. So the commission's focus is less. I think we haven't had as much success on specific set-asides. Instead, we have been focused on including our usual bidding credits for small businesses and rural service providers. So I think we have 15% and 25% for small business in terms of depending on the size of the business, and 15% for rural service providers. So, I think we've found that that's a better approach for us than specific set-asides, because and our set-asides can have some funny effects on the on revenues and raising competition in other areas. So this is generally our approach.
Great, thank you. Okay, I'm going to now move on to look at the results of one of the polls and bring in some questions that have sort of come in from the audience as well. So if we take the question, what would be the best assignment approach for any spectrum that can be freed in the US in the 3.45 to 3.55 gigahertz band? So exclusive use, the sort of traditional cellular spectrum, the score where was 54%. Similar to CBRS, sort of the three-tier model, 38%. And then we had some other approach specific to the sharing conditions in the band, 4%. And then finally, fully license exempt, 4%. So interestingly, the audience are moving to sort of the best assignment approach, suggesting that the best assignment approach is exclusive use, 54%. Now, the reality, of course, is, it may not be possible because of the sharing conditions and the like. So it may be something specific has to be done. And in the next session that's coming up, we actually have a speaker from NTIA who's going to talk about what's going on in the band at the moment. So I would rather leave the discussion of whether that's possible, exclusive use is possible or not, to that session. But maybe I could make a more general point, and that's just coming through in some of the questions that are coming in, which is this whole issue of fragmentation across the band. So you might have a situation where potentially the 3.45 could be used for sort of high power applications. The 3.55 to the 3.7, the CBRS spectrum has more power constraints and also has the whole three-tier sharing model. And then we've got the sort of spectrum above that, the C-band spectrum above that, which still has some conditions in use, but generally is high power, exclusive use spectrum. And that sort of, obviously, that fragmentation, it might end up with a situation where some of the carriers actually end up with spectrum across all three blocks there. And the question I really have is, is that a situation we can cope with technologies such as carrier aggregation and the likes, or are we going to have big problems there? So I don't know, Jared, could you speak to that at all?
Yeah, I'll take it. It's a good question. And I think it actually, something that came up earlier in the week, Andy Clegg at Google, I remember, mentioned something about, could we look at maybe higher powers in CBRS, and that's something that Ericsson is interested in. I think that technology can mitigate a lot of the issues they would have about potentially having, 345, 355 being high power, a low power piece in the middle of CBRS, and a higher power piece. Obviously, the more you can bring them in line, the better. And I know that groups are taking a look at those very issues right now and trying to figure out how they can make this all seamlessly fit together. Carrier aggregation can help. I'm not enough of an engineer to know that you could really do carrier aggregation between like CBRS and a higher power band. I've always assumed that you would have to have sort of a like system between the two. If you have a higher power in 345, 355, and something 37, I suppose you could do carrier aggregation there. But yeah, we're always excited about possibilities for putting together large blocks of spectrum, and carrier aggregation can certainly help. Makes things more complex and adds another band. Anytime you want to, put another band in a device, carrier aggregation counts as another band. And so that's sort of the downside. But technology has always been there in the past, and we expect it to be in the future.
Maybe I could continue this theme of the whole fragmentation issue by bringing in the sort of results of the second poll, which is in relation to which approach should Canada use for awarding C-band spectrum. So the first option of proceeding with the 3450 to 3650 now, and then have a later auction for other C-band spectrum, scored 30%. The second option of proceeding with the 3650 now and allowing Telesat to organise a private sale, got 20%. But interestingly, combining all the bands into a single auction, which I said should run as soon as possible, got the highest score, 50%, which is interesting. I mean, Chantal, I don't know if you want to comment on that, but one question I have is, particularly if we went down that route, that would delay all spectrum, any spectrum being available for some time, which itself has its drawbacks as well. So I don't know if maybe you can comment on, any immediate reactions to that.
So yeah, there's only so much I can say, obviously, since we have something on, since we're working on that right now, and we have an auction already planned. Just what I can say is that it is, and Julia mentioned this too, running an auction is incredibly complicated, and these are big, complicated auctions. And so shifting that big boat to change an auction is very difficult, and it would slow everything down. And so that would be our biggest concern. Like, we do not want to see the slowdown of 5G deployment in Canada. We do recognize, though, the issues. Like, we're very aware about the problems. If an operator gets one block at the bottom and a block at the top, it means 2 radios that they have to put in place. So it is something that we are thinking about, and I'm sure we'll get many comments when we do the 3800 consultation. But it is something we're aware of and considering. It's just, what's the best approach to address that?
I mean, I guess the second auction could or a subsequent auction could, include provision for reconfiguration of the whole band once you see how much spectrum everybody has, I suppose. I don't know, Jared, if that would cause operators problems in terms of having to replace equipment, though. That didn't work across the whole band.
Yeah, I mean, you hope that there'll be, we talk about at Ericsson a lot, the concept of a tuning range, with the hope that, you have a big range, and then certain countries can do certain things, but, overall, whether you're on the equipment side or the end user side of the equation, that if you've got some big range, if you've got like the entire C-band, like a gigahertz or so, that, while we would love to have the whole thing opened up, we recognize that there might be certain areas of the world where you have little pieces of it, but you can come out with chipsets basically that can handle that with the tuning range.
So the other aspect of this poll is this whole issue of the concept of allowing Telesat to organise a private sale. So I appreciate, Chantal, you may not want to comment any further on this, but so maybe I could throw it over to Hazem. I mean, I remember the days, I think I was with you actually at one of the conferences when Intelsat and SES made this or Intelsat made this big announcement about C-band in the US. I think it had just come out that night or something like that. I remember it was the big buzz of the conference, and of course, in some ways, we might kind of christen you, sort of father of the C-band, in that this is where the whole thing kind of the whole process started from there. Yeah. I wonder if you have any comments on the Canadian situation, and also more generally. I mean, obviously, as an incumbent user, it's never nice to lose spectrum, clearly, but are there things regulators can do to perhaps gently persuade you, shall I put it?
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, thank you. Yeah, I mean, it's there's no doubt that when Intelsat and Intel at the time came up with a proposal was a really big shift in the dialogue between the industries, right? So I think there are some elements in the Telesat proposal which recognizes the value of the incumbents, and I think this is the point I was trying to stress before, that if you really want the wheels to move, everybody has to be treated fairly and equitably, so that to get the collaboration that you want. And I think again, without speaking too much right now about the ISID consultation, given it's open, I think this principle is important. Now, since the CBA initial proposal about a market-based approach, we have progressed. I mean, we learned a lot. We heard a lot from the other sides, and we are where we are right now. But I think the fundamental thing that I hope we all agree on is that the recognition of the value of the incumbents and what they can do to accelerate the process and make it move more quickly. I think this is important, and you can see how it's played well in the U.S. process. I mean, clearing 300 megahertz in such a short time frame is really immense. So, and I hope other regulators would recognize that too.
Okay, great. I'm going to move forward with a couple of questions from the audience. So, Joanne LeMay says from LYA says, does anyone have any thoughts as to the timeline when the C-band above 3.8 gigahertz will be discussed, and the scope for migration to IMT in Region 1, which is Europe and Africa. I don't know if any of you can feel like commenting on developments in Region 1.
Above 3.8?
Above 3.8, yes.
I mean, I can jump in and say a couple of words about it because we are in the middle of it too. And I think it goes to the point about you really have to look at how you use C-band in your region. And to the point about one size does not fit all. In Africa, and we are working with a lot of regulators in Africa, the situation is very different. You have a coverage problem, you don't have a capacity problem. And the penetration is quite low. The usage of currently available spectrum is quite low. So simply introducing C-band above 3.8 in Africa is not going to solve the fundamental problem. And this, in fact, comes so the timing is everything. You look at the time and you look at when you're ready to move things. And I believe there was another question that I saw about why didn't the satellite agree to clear 400 megahertz a long time ago when it was brought up? And it's precisely about timing and precisely about the universality of trying to harmonize or force harmonization on other regions. Every region, you harmonize to the extent that you can, where there is commonality, but then beyond that, you have to do what's suitable for your region. I mean, you can't force Africa to move at the speed of the U.S. or to force Asia to move at the speed of Europe, or so there are subtleties and nuances to how spectrum is being used, and that has to be factored into the decision-making process.
Great, and thank you for picking up on the other question, which I was going to raise. So the question was, a suggestion was made to take 3.4 to 4. Was made for 3.4 to 4.2 to be split 400 megahertz each, and for 30 years, and observe this. And apparently, this was made at WRC 2007. The satellite community apparently rejected this idea, and Bino Vindarai asked the pertinent question: if this was taken up, where would we be now? Would we have moved faster? I don't know if anyone else wants to comment on that question at all. No. Okay. In that case, I'll move on to some further questions. Let's have a look. What have we got? What are the question from Barlow Keener from Summit Ridge? What are the interference issues of C-band and the upper range of CBRS? Is this an issue of full power stations next to CBRS? I don't know, Jared, I suppose, do you want to?
I'm being an engineer. No, but I don't know what the specific issues are. I mean, obviously, if you have something high power next to something low power without something more, there could be something going on that you wouldn't have to be concerned about. I know that CTI and others have working groups that are devoted to answering just these kinds of questions. And so hopefully we can get an engineer who knows what they're talking about to actually answer what are the specific interference issues that we're trying to solve for.
Okay, great. So I've got a few questions from Richard Marsden, who has come in. I think to some extent I may have talked about some of these topics, but I'll read them out anyway, just in case anybody wants to have a slightly different perspective. So first, number one is, are regulators in Canada and the US doing enough to address fragmentation risk for MNOs? So that's the fragmentation issues we've talked about, both with CBRS and the likes in the US, and the whole issue of the wider band in Canada. Number two, if not, can carrier aggregation technology solve the problem? I think we've talked a little bit about that already as well. And number three, should other countries such as Canada follow the US precedent of making incentive payments to satellite operators to encourage the accelerated clearance of C-band? So again, I think we've covered all those three questions in some way, but I just want to give, if anybody wants to take, obviously they're phrased slightly differently. So if anybody wants to add any particular point to that.
So I could say something about the situation in Canada with respect to incentive payments. So currently we don't have the ability to do that. That's a fairly long process to put that in place. When we auction spectrum, it all goes to a general revenue fund that the government then can use for other types of programs and to support their objectives. So it's not a very straightforward or an easy process for us from a legislative point of view, and we are under a minister, and it's quite different than the U.S. situation. And so, just to make people aware, for many other countries, it is a very difficult thing to put in place because it's not set the same way as the U.S.
Question for you, Ramiro, just in relation to the Mexican situation and fragmentation. You know, we've seen sort of part of the band being made available for mobile and part of it being made available for fixed wireless access. I mean, obviously for you know, ideally operators would like to have, say, a big block of spectrum, which they can use for probably both mobile and fixed wireless access. So the mobile customers can get the benefits of the full speeds that you can get from having that big block of spectrum. And then, of course, the fixed wireless access part of the service, which gets a much, much lower revenue per gigabyte than the mobile, can kind of benefit from, if you like, it's almost like a cross-subsidization thing. You know, the mobile customers are helping to pay for the equipment, which can also be used for the fixed wireless access. I mean, obviously, there's very little you can do in the short term, you know, in terms of, you know, as you said, you've got the satellite usage there, and also, you know, you've just awarded 20-year licenses, as you mentioned, to operators. But in the medium term, is there any scope for looking at that again? Could you work with the operators to perhaps look at the conditions of the license and maybe extending that out to mobile use, and obviously working with the satellite industry to see what can be done to clear? I mean, obviously not an overnight solution, but is there anything that can be done in the sort of 5-year time frame to help to alleviate, to make things better?
Yeah, I think eventually we are going to deal with that issue, the clearing the satellite part, but it's going to take many years. So right now the satellite is used by the government, so even for national security issues that are very sensitive in Mexico, so the fight against crime, organized crime, all of that. So the satellites now are protected from the fixed wireless, but I think eventually the institute, the regulator, is going to be able to talk to all the parts involved and to reach some conclusion. And it's one of the possibilities is to give wireless mobile access to that band, to the band that is currently shared for right now for satellites and the fixed wireless. So eventually we are going to do that, but we have no plans as of now. So it's going to take many years, basically.
Yeah. Okay. Fair enough. Yep, Julia.
So I just wanted to comment on the fragmentation issue. I think, you know, while certainly we're auctioning 3 separate bands and they will have slightly different service roles, you know, I think we've recognized the issue and have really tried to design an innovative assignment round for the C-band auction, in which carriers will have the opportunity to get essentially interim assignments on those accelerated licenses that are contiguous, and then post accelerated clearing get other more contiguous assignments that factors in all of their additional their B and C block licenses. And the goal here really was to ensure that while we do have 3 separate bands that we're releasing here, that we can get as much contiguous spectrum as possible. So I think we're working hard with what we've got, and of course, you know, in a world where there's no sort of clear spectrum, each of these bands requires their own approach. But we're doing what we can through the assignment phase of the auctions to ensure that we can essentially make these bands as contiguous as possible for licensees.
Great. Okay, we've only got 2 or 3 minutes left. I have one final question on screen from Joanne LeMay, which is, I think, a comment in response to an earlier question about the Region 1 situation and making more spectrum available. She says there can be quite large variations in Africa as well. We know cases where need for mobile spectrum in Africa exceeds what is available now, so capacity can also be an issue. Any comments from the panelists? So I don't know, anybody again wants to comment on Region 1 and Africa specifically within Region 1?
I mean, I can say something that basically it goes back to the point of one size does not fit all. I mean, there's always nuanced approach, but you need to look at Africa as a whole. There's a situation right now warrant complete blanket elevation of mobile, or to up to 3.8, or to even consider going above 3.8 when you have to consider certain realities. You can't land a plane in Africa without relying on a C-band link by satellite, right? So there are certain things that are critical that rely on C-band, and we have seen some countries that have been allowing uncontrolled access to fixed wireless providers in C-band without checking, and then it's interfering with air traffic. It's that critical. So I think we need to think before we get into too excited about. Yes, we have a capacity crunch in a certain city or certain locations. You need to look at the big picture. Are we ready for it yet or not? I think that's really key. So.
Right. Okay, I think we're pretty much out of time, but what I certainly would like to say is thank you to you all. I think that was a very interesting panel session and great discussion on such an important topic, and it'll be interesting to come back in a year's time and discuss how the US auction is going, unless it's still going, of course, at that point.
Hopefully not.
Could be record revenue raising if it is at that point.
That's right.
But let's see how that's going, and I guess Canada will be either in mid-flow or probably finished, and see how that goes, and obviously look forward to seeing how Mexico and all the other regions of the world also go. But thank you all very much. I think that was a great contribution. Thank you to all the people who asked questions, and especially Richard Marsden. Really sorry, I know you're gutted to miss not being moderating this session, so I hope I managed to do you justice and get some of the questions in there. So thank you very much, everyone, again.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
And just to add my thanks to that as well, and of course a huge thank you to Amit for stepping in at 2 minutes' notice to moderate that session. So I think going back to your comment at the start, Amit, the Amit with 6.5 weeks preparation has got a long way to go to top the Amit with his preparation. So let's see how that one goes. So thank you for that, and again thank you to all of our panelists. A really interesting session. So yeah. Some really good points, and as Amit says, it will be very interesting to come back to these issues in a year's time and see across the different countries how things have progressed. So thank you all very much for that.
Hopefully not virtually.
Hopefully not. Yes, it would be nice to do this in person again. Very true. So thank you, everyone, and we're going to move straight on now to our next round of showcase sessions. So you can see on the screen beside me here the next showcase sessions that we have. We have 2 showcase sessions running today. So on showcase stage 1, you have a session hosted by Economists Incorporated, focusing on an introduction to bidding in an FCC-style clock auction, and showcase session 2 hosted by SIA, focusing on comms on the last frontier, providing Arctic satellite services. So those 2 showcases are starting immediately now on our 2 showcase stages, showcase stage 1 and 2. You can find them by clicking on the stages icon in the menu bar. Following that, we have a short break, and then we're back here on the main stage at 11:20, where Amit will be back with a session which is going to be looking at the options for additional mid-band spectrum for 5G. So thank you once again to our panelists. Thank you to all of you out there for the questions, and hope you enjoy the showcases, and I will see you back here at 11:20 for our final plenary session of the conference. Thank you, everyone.